I stood outside the door for longer than I'd planned, the small wooden box pressed gently against my stomach, like it might start to crack. The hallway smelled faintly of aftershave and roses. Vanessa's touch, no doubt. My palms were dry, steady. Years in uniform had trained them not to shake. I wasn't nervous, just aware. Aware that this moment, however brief, mattered more to me than they would ever realize. Inside the box was my husband's compass, a gift he'd carried through every storm, every station. He'd wanted Owen to have it one day. I thought today would be the day. I lifted my hand to knock. Then I heard Owen's voice, muffled but clear enough. "She means well, but you know how Mom gets. Just don't let her ruin this." The words landed in the center of my chest, not loud, not cruel, just dismissive, shrinking. I let my hand fall. The door opened before I had time to decide what to do next. "There you are," Vanessa said, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Perfect timing. We're just finishing up." Her smile was tight, rehearsed. She didn't look at my hands, didn't notice the box I was still holding. I gave her a single nod and stepped aside so she could pass. She didn't wait for me to speak. I turned without entering the room. The box felt heavier now, like it knew it wasn't wanted. Back in my car, I rested it in the glove compartment, closed it carefully, and sat with both hands on the steering wheel. Not moving, not crying, just silent. The dress for tomorrow was hanging in my hotel room. Simple, gray, nothing close to white. I'd chosen it months ago to blend in, to stay out of the way. But something told me that wasn't going to be enough. The gray silk dress hung quietly in the closet when I left. I had zipped it up myself, smoothing every line like I always did with purpose. It wasn't flashy. No shimmer, no lace. Just soft fabric, a clean neckline, and a hem that fell right below the knee. Respectful background. That was the whole point. The steamer I'd requested was waiting at the front desk. I signed for it, made polite conversation with the young man behind the counter, and rode the elevator back up without hurry. 10 minutes, no more. When I stepped back into the room, I noticed it right away. The zipper on the garment bag was open, not all the way. Just enough to say someone had been there. I crossed the room slowly, the steamer still warm in my hand. The closet was empty. It didn't make sense at first. I checked the bed, the armchair, even the back of the door. Nothing. Then I saw it. In the bathroom, tucked into the porcelain curve of the tub, the dress lay like something discarded. The front seam had been cut with precision scissors or maybe a box cutter. Not ripped, not impulsive. A deliberate slice from neckline to hem. I stared at it for several seconds before I noticed the note. Pinned to the inside lining was a square of folded paper. I didn't need to unfold it. I recognized the handwriting by the slant of the T's. "The bride wears white. We appreciate your understanding." No name, no apology. Just instruction. I didn't move. My hands didn't shake. I lowered the steamer onto the counter and stood there, watching the water drip from the dress onto the drain. I had followed every rule, worn the right color, spoken the right amount, stayed where I was placed. Still, they wanted me invisible. Still, it wasn't enough. I stepped out of the bathroom and unzipped my suitcase. There was another bag inside it, packed months ago, sealed without ceremony, just in case. I didn't bother texting first, just walked to his door and knocked softly, but with enough weight that he'd know it wasn't staff. Owen opened it in sweatpants and bare feet, hair still damp from a shower. He blinked at me, confused. "She cut my dress," I said. He looked down, then away, like the words embarrassed him. She was emotional. Everything's been so tense. Don't make it bigger than it is. I waited, wondering if he'd realize what he'd just said. He didn't. I reached into my purse and rested my fingers on the edge of the wooden box. I thought about how long my husband had kept that compass, how he'd passed it to me with a quiet nod, and the words, "For him." "When he's ready." I slid the zipper shut again. "I brought something of your father's," I said. "But maybe not today." He shifted like he wanted to say something else, but I turned before he had the chance. I heard the door click shut behind me as I walked down the hall. Back in my room, I pulled out the second bag. I had packed it out of instinct more than planned months ago, while the invitation was still cold and the phone calls still polite. Inside was my navy dress uniform, folded with care. I hadn't worn it in years, not since the retirement ceremony where they took the command patch from my shoulder and shook my hand like I was done being useful. But I had never quite believed that. I laid it out on the bed. The jacket held its shape like it had been waiting, the creases still sharp, the ribbons still arranged in the same deliberate order, and the collar. The 2 silver stars were exactly where I'd left them. I ran my fingers over the stitching once, then folded it back, not ready to decide. The restaurant was too warm, all clinking glasses and polite applause. I had worn a navy blouse, not the uniform, not even gray, just something quiet, respectful. Vanessa's mother stood midway through the second course, glass in hand, voice bright and brittle. To the people who raised these 2, she said, beaming toward her husband, then to her daughter, and finally to Owen. She didn't look at me, not once. The guests clapped. Someone laughed. The band played a soft chord like punctuation. A waiter leaned over with a refill of water. "Someone said you served," he asked. I nodded. "I did." He smiled. Explains the posture. It was meant kindly. I held on to that tone like it was a gift. I stayed through the speeches. I clapped when they kissed during the slideshow. I kept my hands in my lap when Vanessa's father made a joke about overbearing parents. As I walked toward the valet line, I passed 2 bridesmaids by the fountain. One sipped from a cocktail straw, the other whispered into her shoulder, "She's wearing a uniform tomorrow." The other one smirked. They said to crop her out of the photos if she does. I didn't flinch. I didn't pause. I'd heard worse. In combat, in command, and more often around dinner tables where I was meant to be seen, but not heard. The valet brought my car around. I slid into the driver's seat, adjusted the mirror, and sat for a long moment before turning the key. Back at the hotel, I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't answer Owen's text, asking if everything was okay now. The box with the compass was still in the glove compartment, still unopened, still waiting. I thought about that sharp, careful slice down the middle of my dress. I thought about how much effort it took to erase a person who wasn't asking for attention in the first place. I woke before the sky shifted, the room washed in that soft, colorless light that comes just before dawn. My hands moved without hesitation, years of habit guiding them as I showered, pinned my hair back and opened the garment bag I'd slid from beneath the bed the night before. The uniform lay inside exactly as I'd folded it after my retirement ceremony. White fabric pressed and clean, medals lined in rows that marked entire chapters of my life no one here had ever asked about. I laid each piece across the bedspread, smoothing the cuffs, straightening the edges. The collar was the last thing I touched. 2 silver stars, earned, not gifted. Not inherited, earned. I dressed slowly, fastening each button, adjusting each ribbon. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see the mother who'd been asked to step aside. I saw the woman who'd stood on steel decks in the middle of the ocean, who'd made decisions that mattered, who'd carried herself through storms thicker than anger. By the time I stepped into the hallway, the hotel was quiet. A few early risers passed with coffee cups in hand, their eyes widening just slightly as they took in the uniform. Not disapproval, something closer to recognition. Outside, an elderly veteran waited with his dog. He straightened when he saw me, and lifted his hand in a crisp salute. I returned it with the same quiet firmness. The drive to the chapel felt shorter than the day before. I walked up the stone steps, my heels tapping evenly, and before my hand even touched the door, the voices inside dimmed. Conversations halted. A few guests rose from their seats. Others whispered behind their programs. Owen wasn't in the entryway, but Vanessa was. She froze midway through directing a bridesmaid, her mouth tightening her eyes, catching on the medals, then the stars, then the certainty in my posture. She didn't speak. I walked past her, unhurried, unbending each step, carrying me deeper into the space where they had hoped I would stay small. The moment I stepped into the aisle, the room snapped taut. Vanessa turned bouquet in hand and let it slip through her fingers. It hit the floor with a soft thud that sounded louder than it should have. "Seriously," she hissed, her voice cracking the hush that had fallen. Owen rushed up the side aisle, his collar still askew from dressing in a hurry. "You couldn't let her have one day," he said under his breath, low enough that only I and the two guests nearest the aisle heard it. I didn't answer. Behind me, someone whispered, "That's Commander Elling." A few heads turned. Then a single pair of hands clapped. Then another. It wasn't applause exactly, more like instinct. A ripple of acknowledgement. And just as quickly, it stopped. The room settled back into its script. I kept walking. No pause, no retaliation, no apology. The first pew on the groom's side was empty. I sat down. No one stopped me. No one offered a smile either. The weight of 30 years in uniform settled into the wood beneath me, and I let it. My spine stayed straight. My hands folded once in my lap and stayed there. The music resumed. Vanessa took her place again at the altar, bouquet, retrieved smile, practiced, but slightly frayed. Her voice trembled as she repeated her vows. Owen kept glancing sideways, not at me, not fully, but just enough to register that I was still there. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I watched the ceremony like a soldier might watch a horizon, steady, alert, but unmoved. Not out of pride, not even hurt, but because I had chosen to be present, even when it was clear I wasn't meant to be. And presence, I was learning, can be louder than anything you say. When it was over and the guests began to rise, I stayed seated, just for a moment longer. I could hear the photographer giving instructions outside. They were lining everyone up. The lawn behind the chapel was a swirl of lace laughter and heels sinking into grass. The photographer moved quickly, calling out names, organizing groups, coaxing smiles with the practiced rhythm of someone used to controlling chaos. I stayed where I was. Off to the side, hands behind my back, posture neutral. One of the planners waved in my direction. "Could you shift a bit, just so we get a cleaner frame?" Before I could speak, the photographer glanced up and cut in. "She's not moving. You shift around her." The woman blinked, uncertain, then turned away. I didn't move. I hadn't planned to be in the photos, but I hadn't planned to disappear either. Vanessa's father made his way toward me, napkin still tucked into his coat pocket. He stopped just short of my shoulder. "I served too," he said, voice low. "But you made today about you." I looked at him. Not up, not down, just level. "This was never about me," I said. "It became about me when your daughter cut my dress in half and left a note in my bathtub." His jaw tightened. He didn't answer, didn't deny it. I waited a beat, then stepped back, not to retreat, not to storm off, but to remove myself from his space, to recenter. That's all. The guests kept moving around me. Some smiled stiffly, others avoided my eyes, but the photographer didn't look away. His camera followed me as I stood near a column of stone arms folded gently, not smiling, not posing, just there. And for the first time that day, I could feel it, the frame adjusting around me, not in spite of me, because of me. They had planned to crop me out. But the picture wouldn't work without me now. The light shifted slightly across the grass. The air smelled faintly of champagne and early autumn. I could hear someone calling my name from the reception tent. I walked into the reception hall expecting nothing and still managed to be disappointed. No place card, no chair near the family, no glance in my direction from the planner. A young staff member approached with a folding chair. "We can set this up near the gift table," he offered, uncertain. I looked at the spot tucked behind a column next to the wall of wrapped boxes. I gave a quiet shake of my head. "It's all right," I said. "I'll find my own corner." The patio was quieter. A string quartet played inside, but out here the sounds softened. I stood by the railing, watching the leaves shift in the wind. A man stepped beside me. Maybe late 70s, tan suit, quiet eyes. "You carried the room today," he said, after a long moment. I turned toward him, not with surprise, just calm recognition. "No," I said. "I just didn't let them carry me out of it." He gave a small nod. That was enough. Inside, they clinked glasses. Toasts began. I heard Owen's voice rise above the others, thanking Vanessa's parents, the officiant, the wedding planner, even a distant aunt who sent a pie. He didn't mention me. I didn't expect it, but it still landed like something hollow. I sipped water. The breeze was shifting colder. As dessert plates began to clatter, a woman near the front table stood up and pointed right at me, still by the open door. "Why isn't she seated with the family?" she asked, not loud, but clear. Intention wrapped around every syllable. The room stilled. Forks paused midair. Glasses hovered. No one answered her. Vanessa blinked. Owen looked down. And in that silence, thick, exposed, undeniable, I realized I didn't need a seat at their table to be noticed. I had already shifted the weight of the room. Someone stood to offer their chair. I shook my head. The patio felt right. I stayed there as the music played again, letting the space stretch around me like a coat I didn't need to take off. Then the music faded, and I picked up my purse. I slipped out before the final dance, no announcements, no glances over my shoulder. The room was loud enough that my absence folded neatly into the noise, unnoticed by anyone who wasn't already searching for it. No hugs, no thank yous, no one calling after me. Just the quiet certainty of my own footsteps down the walkway, each one lighter than I expected. Back in my hotel room, I shut the door gently and exhaled. The silence felt cleaner here, less crowded. I removed the uniform piece by piece, laying everything across the bed, with the same care I'd used that morning. Each metal settled without a sound. The collar rested flat. The fabric held its shape as if it had never left the hanger. It felt like putting armor back into its case. I lifted the shredded dress from the bathroom trash where housekeeping had placed a liner. The silk was still slashed from the neckline downward, the seam raw thread sticking out like exposed nerves. I didn't feel sad. Not anymore. I folded it once, then set it into the bin myself. It made no sound at all when it landed. But the note, that small square of paper taped inside the seam with handwriting that tried too hard to be polite, I didn't throw that away. I smoothed it flat with my thumb creases still sharp from where I'd first opened it. "The bride wears white. We appreciate your understanding." I folded it neatly and slid it into my wallet. Not out of spite. Not as ammunition. Simply as something true. A reminder of the line that had been crossed and the one I had drawn after. Silence, once broken, cannot be forced again. I sat by the window, watching the parking lot lights blur through the drizzle. Rain tapped the glass in an unhurried rhythm. Somewhere across town, the music was still playing. The celebration still spinning, their night continuing without me. And I let it. Soon the tapping slowed, and the room settled into a softer kind of quiet one I was finally ready to carry into morning. 2 weeks passed. The dress was gone. The uniform hung pressed and clean again, though I hadn't reached for it since that day. Life resumed, not louder, not brighter, just clearer. Then the letter arrived. A plain envelope, hand-addressed. No return label I recognized. Inside a single sheet. Typed. Commander Elling, I wanted to thank you. Your presence shifted the entire tone of that day. I submitted one of your photos standing near the stone column to the Veterans Portrait exhibit. You don't need a name card. You are the caption. With respect, Darren Holt's photographer. I read it twice. Then once more. My hands didn't tremble. They didn't need to. I walked to the bookshelf and pinned the letter beside the compass. Still in its box. Still unopened. I never sent a copy to Owen. Never mentioned it in a message. Some things don't need translation. And some silences deserve to stay whole. Instead, I reached out to the director of a local transition center. I'd heard they were looking for mentors, women who'd served, who understood what it meant to leave the military, but not the mission. They paired me with a group of 6 women who were younger than I'd been when I joined, but already older in other ways. One of them asked if I still wore my uniform when I spoke. No, I said, not anymore, but I arrived early, always. Dressed sharp, hair pulled back, shoulders straight. Not to prove anything, just to be seen clearly, fully, without apology, because now I knew something they hadn't taught us in service. I no longer needed the rank to carry a room, and that more than any stripe or ribbon was what I wanted them to learn too. I stayed after the session ended, helping one woman adjust the collar of her blouse before an interview. She looked at herself in the mirror, unsure. "You're ready," I told her. Her reflection softened. She nodded once. The wind outside had picked up. Rain again.